Let's look at this a little bit more closely now with Kyle Orton, a Middle East analyst at the Henry Jackson Society. He says the Iran nuclear deal is flawed, but that Donald Trump will find it very hard to undo. He joins us from our Liverpool studio. Thanks very much for joining us. Now, what do you think about Donald Trump threatening to rip up this deal?
It's just not really possible. As John Brennan said, it would be unprecedented for one president to abrogate the deal of a previous one, and it would have very negative consequences on the world stage. So for world order's sake, he has to maintain it, but it would be better if he actually enforced its terms, which Iran has already begun to violate.
I mean, it'd actually be quite hard to do anyway, because this is a UN Security Council deal, not just a US deal.
That's right. It's now been embedded in the international system, but it is a deal outside the norm, because by any normal standards it's a treaty, but that's not how it is inside the US.
But what concerns some people are advisors like Mike Flynn, who say that Iran is actually the major threat, not groups like ISIS. And we've heard from Donald Trump, who is quite hostile towards Iran.
Well, Iran is more threatening than the Islamic State. It has a global terrorist network that's far more formidable than the Islamic State. It's been an enemy for much longer than the Islamic State, and it means as much harm as the Islamic State, and it's more able to inflict these casualties.
But the fact remains that Iran is also one of the major players in fighting the Islamic State, and that's something that Donald Trump has said that he, is at the forefront of his foreign policy situation.
That's actually not true. The Iranians have fought ISIS where it has to, so where it borders the Syrian regime, for example, and where it's on the Shia areas in Iraq. But Iran actually doesn't mind ISIS ruling these areas. Iran can't rule them anyway. And the threat of ISIS is very helpful to Iranian foreign policy.
Would you say it's helpful in places like Mosul as well, then? Because the Iranians are quite crucial in trying to get them out of Mosul.
Well, the Iranian militias, the Iranian proxy militias that are now west of Mosul, are actually one of the major complications in the campaign, because if they start committing atrocities again, or if they push into the city, it's going to give the Islamic State and other very hostile forces much more space to move. And if Iran dominates in Syria and Iraq after this, ISIS is going to have a lot of room to move and a lot of means to come back.
Indeed, we've seen this all play out once before, and why we saw the rise of ISIS to begin with, because of the vacuums created in the Middle East. Let's just move on to Russia, because there's also concern about Donald Trump's rhetoric and attempts to cozy up to Russia. We heard from Senator John McCain, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, warning against this kind of bromance with Vladimir Putin.
Yes, indeed. It's true enough, and as John Brennan says, that Russia has committed terrible atrocities in Syria. Its word has proven worthless. Every time it's entered into negotiations over a ceasefire, it's used it to advance militarily. It should be said in all this that Iran is the ground force that Syria and Russia used to advance in this. So Iran's good faith shouldn't be assumed either. But it has to be said that President Obama tried to enter into a military pact with Russia, and that would have had devastating consequences. It had bad consequences when Russia bombed the convoy and repudiated the deal, but had it gone through, the consequences would have been nearly as bad. So in many ways, Trump would be a continuation of the policy rather than a change of course, and we have to hope that he does change course.
Of course, this is still all speculation. We don't know exactly what his foreign policy will be. Kyle Orton, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.